Good afternoon. How is everybody today? Good, good. This is week 3, Nazi Revolution, 1919, 1934. And Weimar Republic. Well, what the heck was it? Well, what you have, that handout, is a abbreviated edition of that Weimar Constitution. Some of the highlights here. Interesting how this is structured. Fairly liberal, not considered by some one of the most liberal constitutions written in Europe in the 20th century, but be that as it may, it said this was the first draft of the Weimar Constitution was prepared by a Dr. Hugo Preuss, a political science teacher, and this wasn't the main adopted. It was passed July 31, 1919, and it will be signed by Ebert and the Reich Cabinet on August 11, published 3 days later. And it's interesting here, the National Assembly will elect Friedrich Ebert President of the Reich without the formality of popular vote. It would seem then that this is undermined from the beginning. But again, go back to what I mentioned last week and even the week before, that this republic really wasn't fought for. It's imposed, if you want to call it that. You know, even prior to this idea of this German representative government was actually imposed or offered, if you want to use that term, even before the armistice of November 11. You know, when Germany's collapsing and they're discussing what kind of a government they're going to have, Friedrich Ebert looks out the window during the discussions and says, we're going to have a republic. Member of the Social Democratic Party. Yay! You know, well, how is this supposed to be? What kind of a structure? You know, what kind of a house foundation is this house built on? You know, again, it's not like our revolution where people fought and died and then put together a system, some system of representative government. That didn't happen here. You know, 25,000, we'll call them Americans, are killed during the American Revolution. And so it was bought and paid for, you know, with blood. Of course, most major changes man imposes are written blood anyway. You know, it's like Thomas Jefferson once observed, the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Pretty strong statement to make by Mr. Jefferson. Of course, if anyone would know. But this was not. I mean, this Weimar Republic comes out of a defeat in a war. Pretty good sized war. And the collapse of authoritarian government, military dictatorship. Now, the Kaiser really wasn't ruling the country after 1916. It's a military dictatorship in the form of the German General Staff and the personalities of Paul von Hindenburg and Erich von Ludendorff. And it's defeated. But at the same time, you know, again, Germany is not occupied by the victorious Allied forces to the extent it will be occupied in 1945. And so this idea of a system of representative government based on the rudiments of representative government really don't exist here. Because as the economy is falling apart and people are going all which ways, there's the extreme right and the extreme left, and some people are gravitating towards this. You know, going to Versailles again, the idea in 1921 when the reparations are finally assessed, you know, the $33 billion plus the Belgian war debt. Now, how is Germany supposed to pay this? How are they supposed to pay this? And plus, they're going to lose territory. You know, one of the previous handouts had a map of the territories lost, but just to review that, they're going to lose territory in the east, the Polish corridor. They're going to lose territory to Poland. Malmedy-Eupen is going to be given to the French. And then the Germans can't really militarize the Rhineland on the western border with France, out to 50 kilometers. Germans, 2 to 3 million Germans are going to live in this new state known as Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, which Hitler's going to grab in '38. one of those building blocks towards war. And that's another thing. I mean, one of the reasons you have a war, a follow-up war, is because somebody loses territory. Well, here the Germans do. But this idea of reparations, $33 billion, and again, this goes back to Article 231 of the Versailles Treaty. Now, Germany and associated powers are responsible for the war. And again, Germany's the power that's named. The other two powers in the Triple Alliance aren't named, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. They're not even named. Of course, they don't exist at this point to speak of, but they're not named. Germany's named. And again, there's an historical parallel here. Now, people like to talk about that understand this. That Germany took Alsace-Lorraine from France after the 1870-71 war. Yeah, it's true, they did. But there wasn't a wholesale, well, we can't say it's a wholesale butchering of Germany. But if you go back to the 1870-71 war, Field Marshal Moltke of the General Staff wanted a draconian approach to France. By 1871, they wanted Paris occupied with a German governor. Boy, how would that have gone over in France? Not very well. Not very well. Prisoners, French prisoners of war. Moltke wanted them sent to Germany. In stepped Mr. Bismarck. No, I don't want to do this. Is this going to incite French anger? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And so Mr. Bismarck's approach to this is, well, what we're going to do is we're going to ostracize France from European politics. We'll assess them a reparation, or a penalty, if you will, of 5 billion francs. But that's it. That's it. And they'll take Alsace-Lorraine. Of course, what Bismarck's going to do is, again, I mentioned this previously, open up, and the Russians weren't in favor of this, by the way. But what's Bismarck going to do? He's going to have treaties with the Russians and the Austrians so they don't fight in the Balkans, and Germany can peacefully build up its strength without a war. And that's what he's going to do. But he's not going to overcome French anger of losing Alsace-Lorraine. I mean, what was the war cry for the French in 1914? On to Alsace. That was the French war cry. But at the same time, Bismarck was able to ostracize France from French politics for almost 20 years until he's given the boot in 1890. And so he will erect a new balance of power and keep the peace. Such is not going to happen here in 1919. You would have thought, gee whiz, the Weimar Republic, gee whiz, a system of representative government in Germany. You would have thought if the victorious Allies were really serious about not having another war, you would have supported this. They would have supported this. They would have supported representative government in Germany. And they're not going to any worthwhile degree. The reparations are indications of that. I understand Germany has to perhaps pay. They're the loser. I mean, isn't history written by the victors here? Something Marx goes into in the Communist Manifesto. And so this idea of having representative government does not get a good start. Does not get a good start at all. And again, go back to what I mentioned earlier here, the extreme right and the extreme left. It's the right, which is the left, which is really going to make a big, a concerted effort to try to take control. The Spartacus group, or the Spartacus League, communists, Karl Lieb, Knight, and Rosa Luxemburg. A workers' revolt in Berlin, January 1919. And Frederick Ebert, the country is tenuous at this point. You're trying to build a system of representative government, and you have the malcontents from the left trying to launch a revolt and create a Soviet Union of Germany? Well, I need help here. Call out the army, right? Yeah. Well, what does General Gruner do? Sure, we'll be glad to help you here. But let's establish some ground rules first. What ground rules? I'm the president of the country. I get, no. We are going to rebuild the German army exclusive of the Weimar Republic. You know, it didn't make any difference to the general staff who's in power. We're going to rebuild the German army. Again, this veritable institution in Germany was not dismantled despite the fact, well, they're supposed to get rid of the general staff. And so they'll change the name of the general staff to something like the troop office. Well, that doesn't get rid of the general staff. It's still in existence. And sure, they'll put down the revolt using the Freikorps. Again, those groups of unemployed soldiers, freebooters, guys out of work. Again, it shows you the country's falling apart here. Again, the Freikorps, to use the German term, not Freikorps, is kind of a forerunner of what you're going to see in Iraq in 2006, 2007, 2008, the awakening groups. You know, these Sunnis who were out of work, Saddam's army is gone, I got to eat. So what are they going to do? They're going to do what they do best. Grab an AK and shoot at you. Some of these guys form the basis of groups like the Islamic State, so on and so forth. It's what they know how to do, fight. It's what they know how to do. And so they'll put down this so-called workers' class backlash. And they'll do it in brutal fashion. And the army will help supply the Freikorps with arms. Rifles, machine guns, even flamethrowers in Berlin. Light field pieces, and they're brutally going to put them down. This is the reaction from the right to support a so-called system of representative government. Yes?
Good question. So did the Spartacus, the Communist Revolution in Germany, did they get any support from Russia at the time that they were doing this? It's totally independent from Russia.
Yeah, cheering section, if you want to call it that. There's no real support here because keep in mind one thing, 1919, Russia's in a death struggle itself. You've got the Civil War ongoing here. And so there is no chance of Russia, so, you know, Trotsky and them supporting the Germans. No chance at all. No chance. In fact, 1919, just a little while down the road here, Poland's going to invade, the Poles are going to invade Russia. And so they're in a life and death struggle themselves. I mean, there's a lot of fighting going on here. In Germany, some of the Poles are trying to snip more territory out of the eastern border of Germany, western area of Poland. I mean, there's fighting going on here. The Czechs and Germans. And then go south. The Syrians are trying to throw the French out. And then 1920, the Iraqis are going to try to throw the British out. And then the Turkish War of Independence, 1919, 1922. There's a whole lot of fighting going on here. A whole lot of fighting. So this war is really not over. Now you have the residual effect. It's like an earthquake. You get the big one, and then the aftershocks. And then these aftershocks are setting up the big earthquake in '39. And so yeah, these Spartacus, they're on their own. They are on their own. And they're going to be violently put down by the army supported by these freebooters, the Freikorps. But then again, this is interesting too, because if you've got these extremists from the right, what kind of system of representative government is this? Yeah. Not a very good one. You know, and you can see you can have an example like that here when you saw Hurricane Katrina, when the governor went to call out the Louisiana National Guard. What National Guard? They're in Iraq. Well, somebody has to step up to the plate here to ensure order. Volunteers from the Boston and New York police. I mean, you got to give these people credit. I mean, to do that. And then they hire people like Blackwater, some security types from El Salvador. I don't know about you, but that's the last thing I want to see on Main Street in Norwalk. So it's interesting what you see here. It's fascinating. The historical parallels, so to speak. Yes. Well, I thought you had a question. Oh, yes.
when you take a look at the history of Germany and its neighbors, they share a very small plot of land. And if you take a look at Germany going back way before World War I don't really care what you call it, but you always had extremists, right, left, nothing, very little in the middle, and whoever really wanted to stay in power aligned himself with the military. They never seem to learn from their lessons that these things are not going to work.
Well, there's local agendas. There's local agendas anywhere. I mean, the Middle East is loaded with them. Eastern Europe is loaded with them. So yeah, I mean, with Czechoslovakia, Czechs and Slovaks, does that currently exist?
But this is ostensibly a constitution.
Yeah, correct. Correct, but a constitution is only
Is the paper written on?
well, as long as the people want to support it. But again, you're talking about a country here where these people didn't have a democratic tradition to speak of. I mean, it was formed on authoritarianism, and that authoritarian government, in the end, lost a big war. So now that leaves a void, and that void is going to be filled by something. You saw the Spartacus or the communists try this in 1919. And what really gets the communists here is the Weimar government itself, or what's going to be the Weimar government at this point. Many of them are social democrats. Social democrats are kind of moderate, although they trend toward the trade union movement. People like Philip Scheidemann, Friedrich Eber. And then there's the Catholic Center Party. Now, I don't have to tell you the word Catholic. What does that mean? People in that party, some of them are Catholic. And so, but they're kind of moderate. People like Matthias Erzberger, who will be considered a November criminal because he was one of those signatories of the Armistice Pact, the ceasefire. He'll be assassinated in 1921 by the right. And then the National People's Party, which sounds what? Leftist? No. The industrialists. Give it the name National People's Party. It sounds egalitarian here. It's not. And so the communists won't forgive parties like the Social Democrats, the Catholic Center Party. That's the government that called out the troops. So why would we want to support them? So now the left is fractured. The communists will never, for the most part, never come together with the Social Democrats to the extent necessary to overcome the right. So now the left is even split. Yet the following year, March 1920, and this shows you March 1920 really shows you where the political advantage really lies here. Dr. Wolfgang Kapp, the Kapp Putsch they call this, is going to want some military dictatorship. There's about 775 officers from the Army that support this to overthrow the Weimar Republic. And there's not much really done about this. And the Army will not move against the Kapp Putsch until the trade unionists and their leftist supporters, to the leftist center supporters, actually take to the streets. Well, that could mean a counter-revolution from the left. We don't want that. So they're going to crack down on the Kapp Putsch. But guess what? Like with the putsch, the attempted putsch in January, the workers in Berlin and people brutally murdered, including Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. What do you think happens to the putschists, the Kapp Putsch? Virtually nothing by comparison. 48 officers in the Army who supported this attempted putsch, they lose their jobs. That's punishment? That's treason. You know, so when you begin to understand here in 1920, 1921, that the Weimar Republic, for all intents and purposes, does not have a sound foundation. The judiciary, many of the judiciary are from the privileged class. Guess who they're going to support? The workers? I don't think that's happening. Another aspect of German society, the army. Do you honestly think they're going to support the workers? No, that was proven in January 1919. You know, the army is a swing power here. You know, no longer do they have millions of men. That day's gone. The Reichswehr, the German army, is down to 100,000 men per Versailles. No tanks, no aircraft, and the Navy is down to 15,000 men. No longer do they have all these battleships. Sure, they're allowed to keep 8, and then it was 6 pre-dreadnought types, coal burners, which do 21 knots. Whoa, there's a powerful Navy. They can't have capital ships any larger than 10,000 tons. Other nations are building battleships 35,000 tons. Can't have guns any more than 11-inch. There are battleships coming out 13, 14, 15, 16-inch guns. Cruisers, no more than 6,000 tons with guns 6-inch. Heck, there are heavy cruisers, 10,000 tons with 8-inch guns. They want to reduce this. Of course, the British are partially in league with this, to a coastal navy. That's it. And so they want to neuter the German armed forces. But that does not mean in Germany proper, the army is not an important political player. It is. Oh yeah, the German Navy can't have submarines. The obvious reason for that. Obvious reason for that. You know what's going to happen with that? That's interesting. Germany was not supposed to have submarines. And yet in the 1935 Anglo-German Naval Agreement, June 1935. It's interesting what you read here. You know, Versailles is going the way of the dodo here. And the British agreed to that. They're having allowed the Germans build up to 35% of British naval tonnage in warships. And there was another aspect of this, that Germany could build up to 45% of British submarine tonnage. And there was an escape clause to that. As long as, God bless you, as long as the Germans notified the British, I think it was a 6-month notification, the Germans could build up to 100% of British submarine tonnage. It would think that British-French amalgamation at Versailles is doing this. Of course, again, you know, the British being the swing power in Europe, rethink these things periodically, and they say, well, you know, Germany has a little army, and the French can mobilize 100 divisions, so we better switch some support to the Germans to offset the French. Now that worked out well. That worked out well. And so you see here, this government is undermined from the right. Civil servants. Civil servants. You have to have civil servants in a government, right? Bureaucrats. Many of the civil servants are middle class, but some upper middle class, some from the privileged class. And so it seems the deck is stacked against the moderates in the end, or even more so, the left. And so if you're going to have a bona fide system of representative government, shouldn't there be, I'm not saying an absolute equality, because you're never going to get that, but shouldn't there be input from the right, the left, and the moderates? You would think for a functioning system of representative government. Remember the days, even back in the Reagan days, if something couldn't get passed, what did Reagan and Tip O'Neill do? Have a lunch? Let's discuss this. And what did that come to in the end? Compromise? Now, try that now. Try that now. And so that doesn't seem to be what's going on in Germany. The economy. You know, it's in 1921 where the Germans are finally given the bill, the reparations bill, $33 billion, plus the Belgian war debt. Well, by the way, one little side note here. German colonies, talk about losing territory. All those German colonies overseas, like especially in Asia, they lost them all. That's another affront to nationalism too. Of course, who got a lot of those territories in Asia? Japan. Japan came out of this smelling like a rose. You know, I always found this fascinating. You know, this war being the 1914-18 conflict fought for democracy. What a lot of garbage that was. The British and the French kept their colonies. What happened to this idea of people determining their own fates when this war is over with? Boy, that really? Yet the Germans lost theirs. And yet, this war is going to cost the British 965,000 dead to keep her empire. It's going to cost the French 1,565,000 dead to keep her empire. And to get those territories in Asia, cost the Japanese 300-400 dead. Who came out of this smelling like a rose? Gives you a better understanding as to why it took a number of GI and Marine lives to get those islands back from 42 on to 45. Again, another reason you have another war, territory. Territory. But this idea of reparations, you know, and as the German economy is not doing well, you know, in 1921, it took 4 marks to equal $1. 4 marks to the buck. 1922, 400 marks to the buck. And then when the Germans can't pay the reparations, they announce, before the end of 22, we can't pay the reparations. So what are the French going to do? The French, with Belgian troops, occupy the Ruhr, an industrial heartland in Germany. And the mark goes from 400 marks to the buck to 18,000 marks to the buck. And by August 1923, it's like 4 billion marks to the buck. Those are the times between January and August 1923. You could have gone out to a restaurant in Berlin, and what it was going to cost you probably went up 15 times from the time you got your first drink of water to the time you got the check. Yes?
What backed the money? What would back the money that with the inflation of the Deutsche Mark? When Hitler was in, for instance, did he have his own? Because he was stealing money from the government during that period.
Well, there was a lot of stealing going on.
Yeah, but was that money? What was was this still called Deutsche Mark under Hitler?
Yeah, I believe it was.
Reichsmark.
The Reichsmark. The Reichsmark.
What backed that?
Right, but here you're seeing, you know, money was printed to the amount of economic interaction there was. And so, you know, when there's not much economic interaction, and you're not printing that much money, you know, there's really not much inflation going on. However, when you have to pay $33 billion and you have to print money to pay that debt, well, what happens to the currency? 400 marks to the dollar, now it's 18,000. And you probably saw those pictures in the history books where people going down the street with a wheelbarrow load of marks just to get a loaf of bread, as the caption always states. Oh, there's some truth to this. And so what you're seeing here is a total emasculation of the German economy here. That's what you're seeing here. And so does this lead to violent reaction here? Yeah, from the left and the right. And you're seeing it's interesting here too. The political murders that go on here from the end of the war, November 1918 into 1922. There are 376 political murders in Germany. That's like 1 every 4 or 5 days. There's a body winding up in a ditch or in an alley. And a lot of those murdered are from the left. People from the left were murdering people on the right. But a lot of it was people on the left. And it seems it's interesting here when you go back and you take a look at some of these revolutions, the Mussolini's revolution, if you want to call it that, the Nazi revolution, Stalin's revolution in the 1930s. It's the left that takes it on the chin, not the right. Stalin is a quintessential example of this with his industrialization of the Soviet Union. He purged the Bolsheviks in the 1930s, the Great Purges. He moves to the right to erect a factory system to bring the Soviet Union up the scale. In fact, I'm putting together another one of these things, and I'm coming back here in the fall, by the way, to do a 4-week series on women in American history, and that's going to be followed by the Russian Revolution. So if you keep the handouts to this, compare them to the handouts to the one coming up in the fall, the Nazi Revolution, the Russian Revolution. But it's fascinating what you see here. But yes, you see this emasculation or evisceration of the German economy here. However, keep in mind here too, as the German people are doing this, in 1922 here, Lenin. Russia's not doing too well here either. Their economy is in the tank as well. And there is a provision in the Versailles Treaty that Russia, and there's almost like no statute of limitations to this, as far as I could see, that Russia could claim reparations. Well, guess what Lenin wants to do, or proposes. Let's put it this way, proposes. Well, we want to collect reparations too. Well, what do you think the British and French feel? How do you think they're reacting to this? Gee, this is great. We can start collecting Tsarist war debts. Money they owe Paris and London from Tsarist days. And so there's going to be a meeting called, and Walter Rathenau, a German industrialist, will lead the group to Italy, the German delegation, where he's told by the British and the French, you're not even going to take part in the delegation, you're going to get what you're told. That's reassuring. The Germans always had that feeling that, the $33 billion debt and the Belgian war, in addition to the Belgian war debt, was one shoe. Now comes the other, paying the Russians. And yet that's not what's going to happen here. I find this fascinating. Lenin doesn't want money. Russia is ostracized from European politics like Germany is. And yet Walter Rathenau believed that the future of Germany is with the West, despite the round of unpleasantness going on now. The future is with the West. However, considering what's going on at home in 1922, maybe I better rethink this. And Foreign Minister Chicherin petitions the German clique that's in Italy. We don't want money. We don't want money. Well, what do you want? We want political recognition. That's what we want. Lenin, not being stupid, understands that if Germany gives young Bolshevik Russia political recognition and Russia gives Germany political recognition, who's going to follow suit here? The British and the French. That's what's going to happen. This is called the Treaty of Rapallo, April 1922. Lenin pulled off the neatest diplomatic trick of the year. They now have political recognition. That's what Russia wants. Lenin's thinking long term. Of course, beyond that, and again, this is somewhat like the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact of 1939, where Stalin beats the British and the French to the punch with Hitler in August 1939. There's always the icing on the cake here. Yeah, sure, Soviet raw materials to Germany versus German finished goods going to the Soviet Union. This is part of the Rapallo Pact eventually, you know, once the German economy recovers. Trade, that's part of what's going on here, trade. Yet what's underneath? What's the cake? What's the cake? Well, in 1922, you're going to find going into 1924, 25, 26, and into the later 20s, the Germans, the army, Hans von Seeckt, looking to rebuild the German army. They're going to be training deep in the bowels of Ukraine with the Russian army, with the Red Army, on weapons they're not supposed to have, like airplanes and tanks. There'll be production facilities built here so both Germans and Russians can train on this stuff. It's almost like they're preparing for 1941. Like it's an exhibition game to the real game on 1941 when Hitler invades the Soviet Union. But I mean, you know, the German troops are able to train on weapons they don't have. The Soviets are learning German expertise. I mean, people like Mikhail Tukhachevsky will believes, and he'll be purged by Stalin, but he believes that you know, in mobile warfare, something the Germans are going to come to believe. And Hans von Seeckt is interesting. He has that outlook, you could say, from somebody who lost a war and understand why he lost a war and how they can win the next one. The tank, he understands the tank. Mobility here, and how the airplane should work closely in supporting ground troops. That's what they're doing in Russia. They're training on these tactics now. The Allies really don't know what's going on because Germany's not totally occupied. And they're not doing this in Germany, they're doing this in the Soviet Union. And since the Soviets are ostracized from European politics, well, who's going to go here? So they're already training for the next war. Already training for the next war. That's known as the Treaty of Rapallo, April 1922. Interesting what you see develop here. But then again, if the Germans cannot pay the reparations, what's the British and French reaction? In particular, the French. Well, January 1921, they'll occupy the Ruhr with Belgian troops. And they're going to confiscate tax receipts, fees, duties, so on and so forth. And even the French do the same thing the Union Army did to the South. During the period of Reconstruction, they put black troops there. You know, blacks in French uniforms from the French colonies. And that made the Germans real happy. Just like the North, just like Washington's going to do to the South, putting federal troops into the South. Some of these guys are black. Yeah, you can feel the love in the room. But Gustav Stresemann, who will be the chancellor in 1923, believes, like Alexander Hamilton, you gotta pay your debts. That didn't make him too popular with people from the right. That's kowtowing to the victorious Allies, and we don't want that. That helps to spur on Adolf Hitler. Because of those revolutionaries in Bavaria who want to separate Bavaria from Germany. Causes Hitler to move. He wants the whole loaf. He doesn't want a quarter of a loaf. He wants the whole loaf. So he spurred on a revolution. Went into that last week with the Munich Putsch. However, up steps the United States. The Dawes Plan. Charles Dawes, the Dawes Plan. The United States will float the German economy. We will invest in German bonds. In fact, between 1924 and 1932, we're going to pour $7 billion into this country. That's a lot of money in the 1920s. $7 billion when the dollar bought something? Not like now. And so the idea here is, too, looking at it from a selfish perspective, you know, we want to get paid back, too, by the British and the French and the Belgians. Especially the British and the French. So, if the Germans are going to pay the reparations to the British, the French, and the Belgians, and then they can pay us. Well, why don't we invest in the German economy, and then they can pay the British, the French, and the Belgians, and they can pay us. So a dollar is going to be doing that. Yeah, the dollar is going to be doing this. But what happens in Germany? A rebound in the economy? Rebound in the economy? Yeah, people are going back to work. So is there as much interest in things like the Nazis? No, less interest. Interesting how economics influences politics. You know, if people are working and have a few bucks in their pocket, are they maybe happier? Yes. If they don't have a job, or their job is tenuous and it's harder to make money, are they as happy? No. And what happens when that goes on for quite a while? I always remember a political science professor telling me, empty bellies breeds discontent. Remember Mr. Eric de Pendleton telling me that when I was at Norwalk Community College. He was my favorite history teacher. He when he was 19 met Trotsky in Mexico. Sat down two-hour clips with him and talked politics, world affairs, current events, whatever the case may be. So with a brilliant mind. And then the year after that, Stalin got him. This is the same guy who didn't quite get along with his mother-in-law, and he had to drive her to the train station, and so he couldn't wait to get her to the train station, and he got stuck at an intersection. There was a funeral going by, so he put his lights on and joined the funeral so he could get to the train station. I'll admit, he had a pretty good sense of humor. But he was a brilliant historian, Eric de Pendleton. He had a great sense of humor. But yeah, you see here Germany beginning to come back. And so people are going to work. It seems Germany is beginning to right itself here. Americans are heavily investing in Germany. However, that gravy train is going to end 1929. The Great Depression, right? How is America supposed to help Germany if it's going to get to a point where it really can't help itself? And this again will lead to extremist politics. And you'll see the rise again of the extreme right. Not that it ever really went away. And it's interesting here when you take a look at snippets of this Weimar Republic. The Article 1, the German Reich is a republic. The power of the state is derived from the people. If you have a country that does not have democratic or principles or belief in a firm belief in representative government, where is the power derived from the people? And again, go back to what I mentioned earlier. The judiciary, dominated by those from the privileged class. The army, which seems to be operating as a state within the state. Many of the civil servants, middle class, upper middle class, and some from the privileged class. So where is this a functioning system of representative government by the people? That has to be called into question here. The powers of the state in matters concerning the Reich shall be exercised through the organs of the Reich on the basis of the Reich's constitution. In matters concerning the lands are the member states of Germany. In other words, like we have here states, through organs of lands on the basis of constitutional lands. The Reichstag is composed of delegates of the German people. But what's interesting here is Article 25. The President of the Reich may dissolve the Reichstag, but only one time for the same reason. The new election must take place at the latest on the 60th day after its dissolution. However, Article 48, if a land fails to fulfill the duties incumbent upon it according to the Constitution or the laws of the Reich, the Reich president can force it to do so with the help of the armed forces. The Reich president may, if the public safety and order in the German Reich are considerably disturbed or in danger, take such measures as are necessary to restore public safety and order. If necessary, he may intervene with the help of the armed forces. For this purpose, he may temporarily suspend, either partially or wholly, the fundamental rights as established in Articles 114, 115, 117, 118, 123, 124, 153. In other words, if there's a threat to national sovereignty, the president can abolish representative government. That's virtually what it means. And so in 1929, going into 1930, when the economy is falling apart and there's extreme upheaval from the extreme right and left, guess what Hindenburg is going to do? Abolish representative government. And that's where I'm going to end this, because of the fact that brings in the Nazis. And that will lead us to the Night of the Long Knives and how Hitler grabs power. So when you get down to it, really, this system of so-called representative government, if you go from 1919 to 1933, how many years was it really functioning? 1919 to 1924, those 4 years, fights in the streets, the Munich Putsch, the Cat Putsch, the Spartacus in January 1919. Yet it's really only functioning from what? 1924 to the Depression, maybe 5 years where it's really functioning. Why? Because America threw money into the system to help right the German economy. That argument can be made here. And so was there a long-term support for bona fide representative government in Germany? That needs to be called into question here. So this system being founded on the failure of authoritarian rule is going to go back to authoritarian rule. And so it never really gets a start. I mean, the seeds really don't germinate here. Of course, what's going to happen in 45 when Germany loses the next round? Complete occupation of Germany, and then a dismantlement of the general staff, and a final purging of the Nazis, and so on and so forth. And then the Allies will begin to rebuild Germany with a system of representative government. West Germany, that is, not the East. Of course, we know who occupies the East. Mr. Stalin. So we know there won't be a functioning system of representative government here. West Germany will take care of that after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so it's fascinating what you're seeing develop here. But again, the seeds to undermine this are planted from the beginning. The German people didn't fight for this. And it's almost like it's imposed, or it's second thought. Well, we're going to be a republic. Where are the seeds for this? Or where's the real cement for this to put these blocks to make a solid foundation? No, it's built on a foundation of sand. And what happens to sand after a severe rainstorm? Yes?
The other countries that won the war have some reaction to seeing that there was an executive power here that was almost like the old regime. Didn't they have a reaction to how this republic was being formed?
Well, keep in mind here, I mean, there will be no real support out of, well, let's put it where it really should go, Britain and France,
Yeah.
for the Weimar Republic. You know, the order of the day, a lot of this is punishment. And plus, at this point, the British and the French, I mean, they're concerned about their maintaining their colonies at this point. They have trouble at home too. You know, many of their people want their troops back. They don't want their men in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Vietnam, but that's too bad. That's what they're going to have to do. So they're involved in a lot of their colonies. Plus, they're trying to dig themselves out of debt. I mean, look at the British here. In 1914, the British will have had $3.7 billion in investments and assets in this country. By 1918, 1.1 billion. They had to liquidate them to pay for what they're buying from us. And the French will have to liquidate 75% of their holdings here. It's not very good for the British and the French. This is where you're seeing the decline of the British and French empires. They're really concerned with that. And so they don't express enough concern with Germany, except for what? Reparations? They need money. They need money. And they have to pay us off. You know, the banker here. The banker wants to be paid. And so, I mean, for the British, it's almost the same thing you saw going back to the 7 Years' War. The French and Indian War, I mean, it was costing the British taxpayer in 1757 75,000 pounds a year to keep British troops here. But because of the war, the 7 Years' War, in 1763, it was 350,000 pounds. Okay, let's make the colonists pay. You know, a lot of these things come down to what? Money. The bankers, if you borrow from the bankers, they want to be paid. So, that's a large part of this. So, but then when you have people like Lenin, well, I'm not paying those debts off. Hell with you. So, and then you're ostracized. Yes?
But yet for a certain amount of time, not a very long amount of time, the British and the French must have gotten the idea that there was no way that the Germans wouldn't be able to pay the reparations. The value of their marks were going down. So they added insult to injury.
Well, yeah, it's a draconian approach.
So obviously when they began to take over some of the territory and occupy it, matters went from bad to worse.
Well, keep in mind, I mean, it seems the French, to a certain extent, are following a historical progression here. Go back to what Napoleon did in 1805. He destroys the Holy Roman Empire. And that's gone. After what, almost 1,000 years? It's gone. What's going to be put in its place? Well, Napoleon's going to put together this Confederation of the Rhine. 16 German states he's going to put together. And so you're seeing now this effervescing nationalism, but this is a buffer to what? Tsarist Russia. I need to have something here. If I've destroyed the Holy Roman Empire, I need to have something in its place. Of course, when Napoleon puts together the Grand Army in 1812 to invade Russia, there's going to be a sizable number of German troops, sizable number of Polish troops, Austrians to get rid of Russia. But however, it's the Confederation of the Rhine that's important here, because in 1919, the French are going to help push for the idea of, well, we're going to get rid of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but now we'll have an Austria, a Hungary, a Yugoslavia, a Poland. Why? What is that? A buffer to Bolshevik Russia. So Napoleon here, Georges Clemenceau here, 1919, a little over 100 years later, are you doing the same sort of thing here? Yes. And so they don't get out of this progression here. It's called balance of power politics. And so when you get somebody like Woodrow Wilson going here, well, people will be able to determine their own fate. What a lot of malarkey that is. We need colonies. We need to keep these colonies to rebuild our economy. And another thing the French and British took a look, especially the French again. You know, they're not stupid. They knew when they mobilized for war, Germany had access to 9.7 million men. The French, 5.9. Well, there's a manpower disparity, especially when this war turns out the way it was going to go, as an example of industrialized war. You know, again, you can't rely on volunteers or professional soldiers. Now we're conscripting entire populations like we're conscripting entire economies for war. Does that cost bodies? Yeah, look at the casualty lists. And so we need these colonies for men. And so French will have white, black, tan, whatever, in uniform. We need the bodies. But then again, if you're from Vietnam and you were plucked by your village in Quang Tri province and you wind up at Verdun, what? Are you a member of the firm here? No. Who cares? We need the bodies. It's all part of this. So it's a draconian approach. It's a draconian approach. And, you know, that's what these allies are going to do. So this stuff, this war was fought for democracy? Sure. Yes?
I just want to say that in the European mind, war reparation is the regular thing throughout the history.
Oh, yeah. You paid an indemnity if you lost.
That's how the minds are wired there.
In fact,
and still.
In fact, when you bouncing off what you're saying here, when the Spanish in 1873, the Virginius incident, they took that ship, the Virginius, which was supplying arms to the Cuban revolutionaries to throw the Spanish out, and they executed 53 Americans, Britons, and Cubans. It was an American flagged ship. One of the settlements was 2 years later, they had to give the Spanish had to give the American government $80,000. Again, an indemnity.
Well, and the notion of the Marshall Plan and the help to Japan after the Second World War, that is, to the European mind, this is heresy. And look how it works. And no other country in Europe would ever think like we do. How do we get, when we go and attack somebody, we often ask, how do we get out from there? Europeans never ask this question.
Well, keep in mind, too, the Marshall Plan, one of the co-authors was George Kennan. And one of the reasons they're going to do that, the Marshall Plan, keep in mind, yeah, Russia's part of this to offset the Russians, but keep in mind, Stalin wouldn't go with the plan. He was offered. He didn't want to be tied to the American dollar. But what's interesting here is, and Kennan understood this, one of the reasons they did this, you're going to have 15 million American men getting out of uniform and they're going to need a job. Well, who's going to buy our goods? So you make markets. You build up Western Europe and you build up Japan to be a dumping ground for American goods. That's the basis of the Marshall Plan. You know, we didn't do this just because we're nice people here. We did this because we need to make a buck. We need to pay off a debt too. And so it's interesting here. George Kennan said in 1948, the year of the Marshall Plan, he says that we have 6.5% of the world's population and 50% of the resources and assets. And he says that's only going to breed envy and resentment. That's what he said. Interesting when you look at things like that, what you see. But yeah, you're right. If in the 19th century, these little wars, if you lost or a dispute over territory, you pulled your troops out, you paid an indemnity, and you hope for better luck next time. The Japanese did that. And the Japanese, you know, it's interesting, the Japanese pick up on what you're saying here. In the 1894-95 Sino-Japanese War, when the Japanese kicked the Chinese out of Korea, they took the Liaotung Peninsula, and they took Port Arthur, and they got the Pescador Islands, and then in stepped the British, the French, and the Russians. Get out of Korea, get out of the Liaotung Peninsula, get out of Port Arthur. The Pescador Islands you can keep. And the indemnity that the Chinese had to pay the Japanese, yeah, you can keep that. Yeah, you had to pay an indemnity if you lost. That's the penalty you paid for losing. In other words, that debt that Bismarck imposed on the French in 1871, that's supposed to eliminate some of the cost of the Germans beating the French. If you think about it, that's what they're doing. I mean, one of the reasons Haiti is always broke, even though they won that revolution, they kicked the French out. You know, France and America get together. Guess what they made the Haitians do? Pay for the defeat. Pay for the French defeat. They're broke ever since. Yes.
Yeah, but normally an indemnity, in my mind, it's an economic thing that could be in the form of goods and services.
Could be.
So you could say maybe the free world would boycott German goods and services since the country wasn't destroyed.
Right.
You know, but I mean, cash is only going to go so far.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just like go back to the Louisiana Purchase. It cost us $15 million. Well, $11,250,000 of that was actual cash to Napoleon. The other $3,750,000 was a forgiveness of French debt. And a lot of that was being held by Americans, so that money's not even going to leave the country. But, I mean, back in 1803, $11,250,000 was a lot of money. So that helps Napoleon finance his wars in Europe. It's one of the reasons he did it anyway, because he lost, going back to Haiti, he lost a lot of the sugar trade, and back then sugar was almost like gold. So if you're going to lose that trade, I got to get money from someplace. Okay. So, but yeah, that's an excellent point. The thing of indemnity or reparations, whatever the case may be. I mean, it comes to about the same thing anyway. If you lose, you pay. It's always nice to be on the black side of the ledger. So, interesting. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Yes?
How did Hitler finance the military buildup? Was it mainly through American loan?
No, you know, it's interesting here. That's almost goes back to what somebody asked before about the money. You know, when the German currency was exploding in inflation, and the German bankers and German industrialists are going to pay off their debts with inflated currencies. However, keep in mind when Mr. Hitler, when he's going to help put order to the German economy, yeah, they're going to print the amount of money they need for the economic interaction going on. And so this is where you'll see public works program like the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Autobahns. He helps put people to work. And so what's interesting here is if you look at it in that way, what is Mr. Roosevelt doing here with his alphabet soups of programs to try to pull us out of the Depression? CCC come to mind here, WPA, NRA, so on and so forth. Yeah. And so what's interesting here, when you take a look at both countries, the NRA, National Recovery Act, that's a derivative of the Swope Plan of 1929 by Gerard Swope of GE, where we're going to organize the economy, and it would be run by big business and big bankers. It's a corporate state, or a corporate socialist state. And so, well, you know, so people like Herbert Hoover says, I don't want any part of this. This smells like warmed over fascism to me. But Mr. Roosevelt will gravitate toward it. Well, Mr. Hitler isn't going to be doing much different. Of course, keep in mind, Hitler is really not a government functionary. And so it'll be the bankers and the businessmen that will do, and that will wind up doing this. But they need to build an economy and put people to work, or else they're going to get thrown out. They understand that much. You know, Hitler is no John Maynard Keynes here. No, he's interested in power. Well, you got to stay in power. So let's go with the businessmen and the bankers. You know, we won't stay in power catering to the trade unionists. So, but they'll arrange the economy to where they can pay for this. And keep in mind, too, again, you're going to see the spigot open up from the United States, too. I mean, a lot of those, going back to those coal Germany was oil-starved, like the Japanese. And so the Germans in the 1920s, understanding how important oil was, we're going to invest in, a lot of this, some of this money for this will come from the United States. They'll build those coal conversion plants. And they'll be converting coal from a solid fuel to liquid fuel and lubricants to offset oil weakness. And there'll be about 34 or 36 of these plants in Germany. And they will be used in World War II. Interesting. And so they'll wait a while to bomb them, which I always wondered, why did we wait to bomb them? Well, maybe they were going to use them after the war. Of course, if Wall Street bankers had supplied some of the funds for this, well, let's don't bomb them.
Yeah, well, Ford had plants over there.
Oh, yeah.
Under license.
Yes, or GE, too. Yes?
Yeah, from what you've been saying, it occurs to me that all of Europe, Germany and the rest of Europe, the economies were very poor in the 20s, right after the war. They were back much. And did that have an influence in terms of our depression in, 1929 was the stock market crash. But
Right.
was the fact that the European economies were weak that kind of helped bring our economy down.
Well, some of those economies were, coming back. This is an era of globalization too.
Right.
If I mentioned this one time before, if the Earth was being if the world was being traversed by wooden sail in 1750, isolationism in the era of the radio, the telephone, the television. Now you go to the internet and these little phones. Even North Korea can't be totally isolated. Now those days, it's just not going to happen here. But yeah, so the economy, and keep in mind, as America is growing, coming out of the 19th century, the businessman and the banker understands that American people can't digest all the goods we're producing going overseas. And so yeah, if our economy goes into the tank with a depression, what do you think is going to happen to the British and the French? Down it goes. So yeah, there is this knit here. There is this tie here between these powers, no matter what kind of government they have.
In other words, then Germany and Europe was going down. We couldn't sell to them too much, and then
Right.
we were starting.
Plus, keep in mind here too that the British and French empires are doing this. Again, go back to what I mentioned earlier. In 1914, the British had $3.7 billion in investments and assets here. They had $1.1 billion when the war is over. They had to liquidate the rest. They need money. This is a war that's not like these little colonial debacles. This is industrialized, commercialized war in the modern era. Your whole economy is now geared to war. And so when 1939-45 comes around, Britain again was a country that was a $16 billion creditor nation. In 1945, they're a $12 billion debtor. They only have 12 million in gold left. They're done. They're done. And so we, on the other hand, because of our economy, we're going to ingest $29 billion of the world's gold here by 1945. Can you imagine that? We have 77% of the world's gold in 45. So where did power go? It left there and came here. In fact, to show you how bad it was for the British, they had to come here hat in hand in 45. We need $3.7 billion. Yeah, you can have that money, but here again, like General Gruner was telling Frederick Ebert, we're going to lay the ground rules here. Yeah, you can have that money, but guess what? $930 million of that 3.7 has to be spent here, or no deal. All your imports have to be paid one of two ways: gold or the dollar. Either way we make out. Oh, and guess what? If you want to go to one of your Commonwealth countries for a better deal, there is no deal. Again, go back to what I mentioned about George Kennan. You're going to be a big power, you got to act like one. So we're going to use the dollar as a bludgeon. Maybe they ought to change the name of the currency from dollar to bludgeon. But that's what you do. The British didn't do anything different when they were in their heyday, so I don't want to. In fact, Lord Boothby of the British Parliament, after that $3.7 billion deal, will go to Parliament and he will say publicly, this is an economic Munich. Wow. Nice to have friends. So you see the transfer of power coming out of this 1914-1918/1939-1945 Great War. It's all one war anyway, of which the Nazis figure into. Just like the fascists in Italy figure into. Just like what happened with Russia, it figures into. So it's just a change in the power structure. By 45, the British and the French colonial empires are done. who takes over? The United States and the Soviet Union. Changes. Nothing stays the same forever. It changes. It changes.
Where are we today?
Oh man, that's a whole new talk. Where are we today? What? Somebody said, who cares? I don't know. The picture isn't all that great. I don't think it is. So, again, you know, what you see now comes out of that change in 45. Again, go back to what Mr. Kennan said. If you want to be a big power, you got to act like one. And he also said we ought to get over these unrealistic notions of spreading democracy, raising people's living standards, and so on and so forth. That's what he said. You're going to be a big power, act like one. Now, that's up to you to decide whether we are that way or not. Interesting. Yes?
What day of the week and what time will your classes in the fall be?
Oh, you mean those talks?
The Colonies and the Russian Revolution.
They will be on Monday afternoons. She's asking about those two fall series. So I feel like Warner Wolf. Let's go to the videotape. Whatever happened to him anyway?
He retired.
He retired? Yeah. I used to miss that. Let's go to the videotape. This will start on Monday, September 18.
Which one?
Women in American History. And that will go, that's every Monday, the 18th, 25th, October 2, and October 9.
And what time?
3 o'clock. And then that'll be followed immediately, starting October 16, the Russian Revolution. And that will be the 16th, 23rd, October 30, and then November 6th, and that's it.
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. Yep. So women in American history and then the Russian Revolution. So otherwise, that's it. And next week is how Hitler takes power. Going to also include, too, in that talk, why systems of representative government seem to fall prey to things like fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, things of this nature.